Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, along with Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, Graham Noble, and John Clark. And this is The Conservative Five, an online TV production of Liberty Nation News. Autopen Gate. The latest demand from the American public is for President Trump to get to the bottom of those last-minute pardons that Joe Biden may or may not have personally signed. I should also add that maybe Joe Biden may or may not have understood what his minions were up to. So let's watch a little clip, Trump dropping the hammer.
Generally speaking, signed it with Autopen. So how would he know that Autopen is a big deal? I don't know. They're having who's doing this? So when my people come up, Will and all of the people, Steve, they come up and, sir, this is an executive order. They explain it to me. And, 90% of the time I sign it. 99% of the time I say do it. But they come up and I sign it. But you don't use Autopen. It's, number one, it's disrespectful to the office. Number two, maybe it's not even valid because, who's getting him to sign? He had no idea what the hell he was doing. If he did, all of these bad things wouldn't be happening right now.
Well, we could discuss Autopen for hours, but Graham, can you give us a rundown on how this all came to light?
Yes, I can. Essentially, how this first came out was through the Heritage Foundation and a Heritage Foundation initiative known as the Oversight Project. Now, the Oversight Project basically is a project that pushes for transparency and accountability in government, so that the government is actually accountable to the people for what it does. And the way the Oversight Project operates is it uses FOIA requests, i.e., requests for government documents under the Freedom of Information Act, and essentially, the Oversight Project posted to X at the beginning of this whole thing. To their revelation of this was when they posted to X and they said, "quote We gathered every document we could find with Biden's signature over the course of his presidency. All used the same Autopen signature, except for the announcement that the former president was dropping out of the race last year." So, end quote. They didn't say so at the end of it. I said so. No. Anyway, obviously they didn't look at every single document Joe Biden had ever signed or supposedly signed, but that is a lot of documents. And of course, if it turns out, as one of Trump's advisors, a lawyer, off the top of my head, I don't remember his name exactly, Mike somebody, but he's a lawyer and a Trump advisor, and he said that if Joe Biden wasn't aware of some of this Autopen use, then the documents in question are basically null and void.
That gives me the willies a little bit, but having worked in the government for a state leader, Autopen is used frequently. I can guarantee you that. Not necessarily on the most important things, but
well, I think
presidential executive order is kind of important.
Well, I think you can probably confirm this for me, Sarah, because you have the experience to know this. But generally speaking, Autopen is used when there are multiple copies of the same document that need to be signed.
Yes,
it's like that. It's basically a time-saving measure.
And other things like proclamations and announcements where the governor or the leader or the senator or whatever is not around to do it. So yeah, but anyway, I don't want to go into that whole fast world. Anyway, I don't want to tell anybody I was part of the Autopen generation. Anyway, Mr. John Clark, can you maybe speak on the legality of the abuse of the Autopen briefly, John Clark?
Yes, I can. It's legal. But it's gray. It's gray. I can speak onto the grayness of the legality. I believe
well, that's what we need.
The U.S. Fourth Circuit has ruled that, to quote, the absence of writing does not prove a commutation did not occur. It raises the question. We're back to a question of fact again. The Constitution doesn't say you can't do it. As President Trump pointed out, he signs them by hand, executive orders and important documents. That would have clarified this. It's going to come down to whether Joe Biden actually had volitional involvement. Did he know what he was signing? Did he authorize it? And that's a question of fact. And regardless of whose side has the burden of proof, either he has to prove he knew and he's going to come testify, which we'll see after the Hur report, whether he has the capacity to testify to when we've got this whole shadow hanging over his competence. And there's a difference between, for instance, executive orders or authorizations for payments abroad. And then we have a second gray area because were these actually legitimate pardons at all? The purpose of a pardon is to express mercy and justice, not to avoid accountability. So the second issue that they have here is whether they're legitimate at all. But the fundamental issue will be is when he said, and the press announced, that he commuted 2,500 sentences for nonviolent offenders, did he not know that some of them were convicted murderers when Leonard Peltier and most of death row inmates their sentences were commuted? Did he know that? So we really have to find out, once again, question of fact. And the burden certainly will be in some part on the Biden administration if he wants these pardons in particular to stand. And how much can you pardon? So there's a second problem with the Autopen is the ability for the president to pardon. And if Anthony Fauci committed a crime against the U.S. government, it can be waived preemptively. But if they find out he buried somebody in a dumpster, I don't think it's going to be used that way. There's another gray area to just give blanket pardons retroactively or prospectively to a whole category of thousands of people who actually happen to be a lot of your political allies who you say you have to protect it against being unfairly targeted by a future administration.
Well, Dave, Mr. John picked up on something I want you to expand on, that death row thing. And I have issues with death row inmates only because I really have to have proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And I don't know if they all were or not because I don't know anything about it. I'm not a lawyer. But who were the biggest benefactors of the pardon machine, Dave?
Well, I think obviously, the Biden crime family. And I only say that because one of the family was actually defined as a criminal. And the leaders of the January 6th Inquisition, I think there's no question about that, those who were pardoned. And then, of course, as John pointed out, there you have the prisoners who have committed the most heinous of crimes, who got a get out of jail free card. So what we don't know is the extent to which the Autopen was used to do the nation's business and, sign international agreements. I would question whether or not if some nameless bureaucrat in the White House happened to use the Autopen because he had a sudden urge to do that. Well, you don't know. That's the point. All of these things have this cloud of not knowing what was going on. And remember, the president doesn't operate the Autopen. Again, some faceless administrative staff person does. And he may do it at the behest of the president, but we have no idea. And it would be useful to go back and look at all of the official signatures that had something to do with the nation's business that committed America to do something. And if those were Autopen, then I think there is at least some question that those agreements need to be scrutinized and to decide whether or not the nation really needed to do that. And you have some basis for just discounting it. But what this has demonstrated is that what you found is that Biden actually did less in leading the country than anyone imagined.
I've seen a lot of this. I've seen so much talk about this on social media and just in the local, cafes and pub circles. And I mean, should we just move on? Should we just move on as a country and see what the next 4 years are going to give us? Or should we unravel the legacy of this administration? Andrew, you're on a perch up there up north. What do you think?
Well, excuse me. First, I'd say that if Trump's rhetoric actually moves beyond the digital confines of Truth Social or prepared remarks of the Justice Department, For what I've read, it will likely be shot down in court. Now, again, I'll defer to our legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. So all our viewers, I recommend contacting him and asking him and inundating his inbox with questions. Now, of course, if you're unraveling the previous administration's legacy, I would go after other things. One thing I would undo would be the Inflation Reduction Act, which a new report came out said that it's actually going to cost about $5 trillion in its lifespan. Another one I'd reverse would be the Chips and Science Act. Those are various things that the current Trump administration could do if you want to really unravel the previous administration's disastrous legacy. Now, of course, this leads to a broader question. Where does it end? Do you want to completely undo every single aspect of your immediate predecessor? Or another question is, how far do you want to go? I mean, if you want to go down the rabbit hole, go to, unravel Woodrow Wilson's legacy of, the income tax or the establishing the Federal Reserve. Of course, I had to turn this into an economic argument because, I'm not much of an expert. But yeah, so those are the things you want to do. So ultimately, if Trump went ahead with this, from what I've read, it would be shot down in court, or it could serve as another political distraction for the administration's broader efforts.
Well, it's not a bad analysis there, Andrew Moran. I didn't
know Wilson had an Autopen.
In my opinion, I think you ask an interesting question, Sarah, because I think largely we should move on. Trump has got too many things to do that he needs to do, that he should do, that he can do for this country, for us to be dwelling in the past. I will make one exception to that. I think the whole January 6th select committee, or the unselect committee, as Trump likes to call it, I think those people on that committee deserve a reckoning, and I think they should actually be pursued to the maximum extent of the law or of any congressional investigations or anything, because that was one of the most shameful things that happened in U.S. history. I mean, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of people were rounded up by the FBI, and yet they couldn't find one pipe bomber, and yet they rounded up all these hundreds of people from all over the country, and they threw them in prison. They denied them their constitutional rights. They had a star chamber type, even unauthorized, unofficial committee that Republicans weren't even allowed to select people to sit on. They tampered with witnesses. They tried evidence. Yeah. I mean, those people need to answer for what they did. The rest of it, honestly, I could care less. Let's not relitigate every single thing the Biden administration did. Right. No, absolutely. Right. We got better things to think
America
about.
voted for him, and so that's what we got. That was exactly what we all voted for. I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but he was our president for 4 years. So anyway, poor old Joe. I almost hope he can address every single pardon he gave. I'm not turning blue, holding my breath, though, on that one. But we'll keep you informed. Thanks for tuning in, and special thanks to this very smart kid. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, we're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel, where you can see all of our TV productions. Now, Liberty Nation News does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for the latest news and commentary. Your choice for free thinking, free speech, libertynation.com.